Sir, please don't move. The fragments are still embedded near your optic nerve. Alexander Thorne's world had been reduced to darkness and the sterile smell of hospital disinfectant. But that voice, soft, careful, with just the faintest trace of an accent he couldn't place, cut through his panic like light through shadow. He'd heard thousands of voices in his 42 years. Board members, journalists, world leaders. But this one was different. This one made his racing heart slow to something resembling normal. Who are you? His own voice came out rougher than intended, stripped of the commanding tone that had built a tech empire worth $37 billion. I'm Aria. I'll be your primary nurse while you recover. 3 days ago, Alexander had been standing in his glass-walled office 70 floors above the city, reviewing acquisition targets and planning his next philanthropic venture. Then came the explosion, the terrorist attack on his headquarters. The flying glass that stole his sight and left him trapped in this suffocating darkness. But Aria's voice, it was doing something impossible. When she spoke, the panic that had been eating him alive since he'd awakened sightless seemed to pause, like a wild animal suddenly tamed. Can you tell me your pain level, Alexander? The way she said his name, without the usual deference or calculation he'd grown accustomed to, made something twist in his chest. Not Alexander Thorne, tech mogul. Not Mr. Thorne, sir, your excellency. Just Alexander, like he was human. I don't understand what's happening to me, he whispered, and immediately regretted the admission. Alexander Thorne didn't admit weakness. But the darkness had stripped away more than his sight. It had peeled back every layer of armor he'd spent decades building. The surgeons removed most of the glass fragments, Aria explained, her voice moving closer. He caught a hint of something floral, jasmine maybe. But there was damage to your optical cortex. Dr. Morrison will discuss the prognosis with you tomorrow. Tomorrow. As if there would be a tomorrow that mattered. As if his entire identity hadn't been obliterated in 60 seconds of flying glass and screaming metal. Hey, my friend, hope you're doing well. Drop a comment and let me know how you're feeling about this story so far and where you are watching from. Some stories are too close to my heart to share on YouTube. I send those, along with little life lessons and surprises, to my email circle. If you'd like to be part of it, you can join with the link in the description. But Alexander's mind was elsewhere, fixated on the impossible comfort he found in this stranger's voice. He'd built his fortune reading people, analyzing their tells, their weaknesses, their desires. Yet Aria remained an enigma wrapped in kindness and professional competence. How long have you worked here? He asked, grasping for some way to understand this lifeline in his ocean of darkness. 2 years in this ward, she replied, and he heard the soft scrape of a chair being pulled closer to his bed. But I've been nursing for 8 years total. 8 years. She would have been young when she started, maybe fresh out of school. The thought of her choosing to dedicate her life to caring for broken people, when she could have done anything else, created an unfamiliar warmth in his chest. In his world, everyone wanted something. Money, access, influence. But there was something in Aria's voice that suggested she might be different. The board meeting, Alexander said suddenly, panic rising again. They'll try to remove me as CEO. My assistant needs to... Alexander. The firmness in her voice stopped him cold. You were in a coma for 6 days. Your assistant, Noah, has been coordinating with your executive team. Your company is stable. 6 days. 6 days lost to darkness while his empire hung in the balance. The weight of helplessness crashed over him like a tsunami. He who had controlled every aspect of his life, who had never been dependent on anyone, was now utterly at the mercy of others. I can hear your breathing changing, Aria said softly. You're having a panic attack. Can you focus on my voice? And somehow, impossibly, he could. Her voice became his anchor in the storm of his fear, a lighthouse beacon cutting through the darkness that had consumed his world. As she guided him through breathing exercises, Alexander found himself wondering if he was losing his mind. He'd never been affected by anyone this way. Not by the supermodels he'd dated. Not by the brilliant executives who'd worked for him. Not by anyone. But there was something about Aria that defied every rule he'd learned about human nature. In a world where everyone wanted to use him, she seemed to want nothing except his well-being. And that impossibility terrified him almost as much as the darkness itself. The next morning brought Dr. Morrison's devastating verdict wrapped in medical terminology that couldn't soften its impact. The damage was extensive, irreversible. Alexander Thorne, the man who had conquered digital frontiers and reshaped industries, would never see again. "I know this is difficult to process," Dr. Morrison was saying, but Alexander had stopped listening after permanent visual impairment. The words echoed in his head like a death sentence. When the doctor left, silence filled the room like poison gas. Alexander lay motionless, feeling the weight of his new reality crushing down on him. Then he heard footsteps he was already learning to recognize, lighter than the nurse's, purposeful but unhurried. "Aria, brought you some real coffee," she said, and he heard the soft clink of a mug being set on his bedside table. The hospital stuff tastes like regret and broken dreams. Despite everything, the corner of his mouth twitched upward. Speaking from experience, "Trust me, I've consumed enough hospital coffee to know." He heard her settle into the chair beside his bed. "How are you handling the news?" The question was simple, but her tone carried something he wasn't used to: genuine concern without agenda. In his world, sympathy usually came with a price tag attached. "I built everything on being able to see 3 moves ahead," Alexander said quietly. "Reading faces, catching tells, analyzing market trends on screens. Now I can't even see my own hand." "But you're still you," Aria replied. "Your mind, your experience, your intuition, none of that required sight." "Easy for you to say." The bitterness in his voice surprised him. Alexander Thorne didn't do self-pity, but the darkness was changing him, stripping away the polished facade he'd maintained for decades. "You're right," she said simply. "I can't understand what you're going through, but I've seen people rebuild themselves after losing everything they thought to find them. Some of them become stronger than they ever imagined possible." There was something in her voice, not platitude or false comfort, but lived truth, as if she spoke from experience rather than textbook training. "Tell me about yourself," Alexander said impulsively. In his old life, he wouldn't have cared about a nurse's background beyond her credentials. But now, her voice was his only connection to warmth in a world gone cold. He heard her shift in the chair. "Not much to tell. Grew up in foster care, worked my way through nursing school. Found my calling taking care of people who've had their worlds turned upside down." Foster care. That explained the independence in her voice, the lack of deference he'd come to expect. She'd learned early that she could only rely on herself. "No family?" he asked. "Not in the traditional sense." There was a careful distance in her words now, as if she'd revealed more than she'd intended. "What about you? The media always paints you as this solitary figure, but surely—" "My parents died when I was 12, Alexander found himself saying. "Car accident. I was raised by my grandfather until he passed when I was 19. Built the company from scratch after that. So we're both orphans in a way." The simple statement hung between them, creating an unexpected bridge across the vast gulf of their different worlds. For the first time since the explosion, Alexander felt less alone. Over the following days, Aria became more than his nurse. She became his translator to a world he could no longer see. She described the view from his private room window, the way morning light painted the walls, the expression on Dr. Morrison's face during rounds. But more than that, she began teaching him to navigate in darkness. "Trust your other senses," she coached as she helped him walk the hallway. "The floor here changes from linoleum to carpet. Feel the difference through your shoes. The nurse's station is around this corner. You can hear the soft beeping of monitors and the rustle of charts." Her hand on his arm was light but steady, offering guidance without making him feel helpless. When other staff spoke to him in the loud, slow tones people used with the disabled, Aria's voice remained normal, treating him like the intelligent man he'd always been. It was during his second week that Noah, his assistant, delivered the first betrayal. The board is concerned about your ability to continue as CEO, Noah said carefully, his voice tight with discomfort. James suggested a temporary medical leave while you adjust. James Blackwood, Alexander's former college roommate and current CTO, the man he trusted with the technical heart of his empire. Temporary, Alexander repeated, tasting the lie in the word. And if I refuse? They have the votes, Alexander. James convinced them that the company needs stable leadership during the market uncertainty following the attack. The attack that was supposed to have killed him. Alexander felt the pieces clicking together with horrible clarity. The bomb had been placed with surgical precision, designed to take out the top floor of his building during the weekly executive meeting. Only a last-minute schedule change had prevented total decimation of his leadership team. James pushed for the meeting to be moved to your office. Noah continued reluctantly, said it would be more secure, or perfectly positioned for maximum damage. After Noah left, Alexander sat in his hospital bed, processing the magnitude of his situation. Not only was he blind, but his closest friend had orchestrated his downfall. The explosion might have been terrorism, but the timing, the location. James had known exactly where to place Alexander for maximum impact. Rough meeting. Aria's voice cut through his spiraling thoughts. How did you know? Your breathing changed, and you've been clenching your jaw for the past 10 minutes. He heard her footsteps approach. Want to talk about it? For a moment, Alexander considered deflecting. But something about Aria's presence made honesty feel safer than it had in years. My oldest friend just stole my company while I was unconscious, he said flatly. Used my blindness as justification for a coup. I'm sorry, she said, and the sincerity in her voice cut deeper than the betrayal itself. That's devastating. The worst part is, I should have seen it coming. James always resented that I was the face of a company we built together. I just never thought he'd go this far. Aria was quiet for a long moment. Then, sometimes the people closest to us are the ones we can't see clearly. Sight has nothing to do with it. The wisdom in her words hit him like a physical blow. Here was this woman who'd known him for 2 weeks, offering insights that his decades of business experience had missed. How do you know so much about betrayal? He asked. Another pause. Longer this time. Experience teaches hard lessons, she said finally. But sometimes losing everything is the only way to find out what actually matters. As night fell over the hospital, Alexander lay awake thinking about Aria's words. In losing his sight, he'd lost his company, his position, his entire identity. But he'd gained something unexpected. The ability to hear truth in a person's voice without the distraction of their face, their clothes, their social signals. And Aria's voice held secrets that intrigued him more than any business deal ever had. The attack came at 3:17 a.m., not from terrorists this time, but from something far more personal and devastating. Alexander jerked awake to the sound of his hospital room door opening with unusual urgency. But instead of Aria's familiar footsteps, he heard the heavier tread of multiple people entering his room. Mr. Thorne. A voice he didn't recognize, cold and professional. FBI Agent Martinez. We need to speak with you immediately. Alexander struggled to sit up, disoriented by the sudden intrusion into what had become his safe space. What's this about? We have evidence suggesting the bombing of your headquarters was an inside job. Agent Martinez continued. Someone with intimate knowledge of your schedule and security protocols. The words hit Alexander like ice water. An inside job. His mind immediately went to James, but the agent's next words shattered even that terrible certainty. We've arrested your nurse, Aria Delacroix, on charges of conspiracy to commit murder and corporate espionage. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. That's impossible. Miss Delacroix has been passing information about your condition and recovery timeline to an unknown party. We intercepted encrypted communications from her personal device. Financial records show payments totaling $200,000 deposited into an offshore account in her name. Alexander's chest constricted. The one person who had made this nightmare bearable, who had treated him like a human being instead of a victim or a target. She had been playing him all along. Where is she? His voice came out strangled. In custody. We're also investigating whether she had access to your medical records for purposes beyond patient care. Her background check revealed some concerning discrepancies. After the agents left, Alexander lay in the suffocating darkness, feeling more alone than he had since his parents' death 30 years ago. Every memory of the past 2 weeks replayed in his mind, tainted now by the knowledge that Aria's kindness had been performance, her care calculated manipulation. The woman whose voice had become his anchor in the storm had been the one holding the rope, waiting for the right moment to let him drown. But as the hours passed, something nagged at him. The Aria he'd come to know, her laugh when he made terrible jokes about his situation, the way she remembered exactly how he liked his coffee, the genuine frustration in her voice when other staff treated him like he was mentally impaired along with being blind. None of it felt like an act. When Dr. Morrison arrived for morning rounds, Alexander was ready with questions. The nurse who was arrested. Did you know her well? Dr. Morrison paused. Aria? She's one of our best. This whole situation is baffling, honestly. She's never shown anything but complete dedication to patient care. What kind of discrepancies in her background? I probably shouldn't discuss this, but given that you're the victim. Dr. Morrison lowered his voice. Her nursing credentials check out perfectly, too perfectly, as if someone constructed an ideal background from scratch. Constructed, like an identity created for a specific purpose. Doctor, I need you to arrange something for me, unofficially. That afternoon, Sebastian Kane, Alexander's head of security, arrived with information that changed everything. The FBI case against Aria is falling apart, Sebastian reported in his usual efficient monotone. The encrypted communications they intercepted, they were to her foster sister in Romania who's been struggling with medical bills. The $200,000 was Aria's life savings, sent to pay for her sister's cancer treatment. Alexander felt the world shift again, but in a different direction this time. Then why arrest her? Because someone wanted her away from you. The warrant was rushed through based on falsified evidence. Someone with serious influence made this happen fast. James. That's what I thought too. But James is clean on this one. He's been focused entirely on the board coup, not on your personal security. Sebastian's voice took on a grim tone. Alexander. Whoever did this knew about Aria specifically. They targeted her to isolate you. The implications hit Alexander like a physical blow. Someone had studied him closely enough to recognize that Aria had become important to him. Important enough to weaponize her removal. Who else knew about her significance? That's the problem. The only people who could have observed your interactions with her were hospital staff, or Sebastian paused significantly, or someone with access to my medical records and room surveillance. The hospital's security footage shows someone accessed the patient monitoring system remotely. They've been watching you, Alexander. Every conversation, every moment of vulnerability. Alexander's blood ran cold. His growing attachment to Aria hadn't been private. It had been observed, analyzed, and exploited by someone who understood exactly how to hurt him most effectively. I need to see her, Alexander said. That's not possible. She's in federal custody and visiting restrictions. I don't care about restrictions. I need to know if what I heard in her voice was real or if I'm losing my mind along with my sight. Sebastian was quiet for a long moment. Alexander, are you sure about this? If she was playing you, then I need to know. But if she wasn't, if someone set her up to destroy the one good thing in this nightmare, then she's in danger, and it's my fault. As Sebastian left to make arrangements, Alexander realized the terrible truth. Losing his sight had been devastating, but losing Aria felt like losing hope itself. And if someone had orchestrated her removal specifically to break him, then they understood his weakness better than he understood it himself. In the growing darkness of evening, Alexander faced a choice that would define everything that came next. He could retreat into the safety of his privileged isolation, protected by security teams and legal barriers. Or he could step into the unknown, guided only by his growing certainty that Aria's voice had been the first real thing he'd encountered in years. The explosion had taken his sight. James had taken his company. But he wouldn't let anyone take away the possibility that something genuine had flickered to life in the ruins of his old world. Getting to Aria required calling in favors Alexander had been saving for decades and leveraging connections that stretched from federal judges to organized crime bosses. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was using the power structure he'd spent his life building to save a woman he'd known for 2 weeks. The federal detention center smelled like industrial disinfectant and desperation. Sebastian guided Alexander through the security checkpoints. His familiar presence, the only thing keeping Alexander's anxiety manageable in the maze of bureaucratic hostility. "She doesn't know you're coming," Sebastian warned as they approached the visiting room. The lawyers advised against any contact. "The lawyers can go to hell." But when Alexander heard Aria's voice through the reinforced glass partition, his confidence crumbled. "Alexander, what are you doing here?" She sounded exhausted, defeated. Nothing like the woman who had guided him through his darkest hours with unwavering strength. "I needed to hear your voice," he said simply, pressing his palm against the cold glass barrier. "To know if what I felt was real." "What you felt?" Her voice carried a bitter laugh. "You felt sorry for the poor nurse who was nice to you. That's not the same thing as—" "Stop." The command in his voice cut through her self-deprecation. "I've spent my entire adult life reading people, understanding their motivations, seeing through their masks. I couldn't see your face, Aria, but I could hear your soul. And nothing I heard was a lie." Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths. "The money they found," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was for my sister's treatment. Lung cancer, stage 4. The doctors in Romania said she had 6 months without the experimental therapy available in Germany. I know, you know, my security team investigates everyone in my orbit. But I also know that transferring your life savings to save your sister's life isn't exactly the behavior of a hardened terrorist." Another pause. Then, "Alexander, there's something else. Something the FBI doesn't know." His pulse quickened. "What?" "The night before the explosion, I received a call at home. A man's voice, American accent, very educated. He knew things about my past that aren't in any official records. He said if I didn't cooperate with gathering information about your recovery, my sister would lose her spot in the treatment program." Alexander's blood turned to ice. "What kind of information?" "Your emotional state, how you were coping with the blindness, whether you were forming attachments to anyone on the staff. Specifically, whether you were becoming dependent on any particular caregiver." The scope of the manipulation was breathtaking. Someone had orchestrated not just the explosion and the corporate coup, but had targeted Aria specifically to create and then destroy his emotional lifeline. "Did you tell them anything?" "I told them you were responding well to treatment and that you were adjusting to your condition better than expected." "But Alexander," her voice broke slightly, "I never told them about the conversations we had, about the way you opened up to me. That was real, and I protected it." The revelation hit him like a physical blow. She had been coerced into surveillance, but she'd drawn the line at betraying the authentic connection that had developed between them. "Who was the voice?" Alexander asked. "I don't know, but he knew about my sister's condition before I told anyone at the hospital. He knew about my childhood, my real name." "Aria Delacroix isn't your real name?" A long pause. "I legally changed it when I turned 18. My birth name is Aria Volkov." Volkov, Russian ancestry, which explained the subtle accent he detected. But why change her name unless she was running from something? "The man on the phone," Aria continued, "he used my birth name. Called me Aria Volkov like he'd known me my whole life." Alexander's mind raced through the implications. Someone with access to sealed juvenile records, international medical information, and the resources to orchestrate federal investigations. The list of people with that kind of reach was short and terrifying. "Aria, I'm going to get you out of here." "Alexander, no. If you get involved, if you try to help me, they'll destroy you completely. You've already lost your sight and your company. Don't lose your life too." But Alexander was already thinking 3 moves ahead, the way he always had, the way he still could, even in darkness. Sebastian, he called to his security chief. I need you to contact Nathaniel Cross. He heard Sebastian intake sharply. Nathaniel Cross was a fixer who operated in the gray spaces between legal and necessary. Someone Alexander had used exactly twice in 20 years for problems that couldn't be solved through conventional channels. Sir, are you sure about this path? Someone played a game with my life, my company, and an innocent woman. Now, I'm going to play back. And unlike them, I'm not going to hide behind proxies and false evidence. As they left the detention center, Alexander felt something he hadn't experienced since before the explosion. Purpose. For 2 weeks, he'd been a victim, acted upon by forces beyond his control. But the man who had built a tech empire from nothing wasn't going to lie down and let enemies destroy what mattered to him. Even if what mattered to him was a woman he'd known for 2 weeks, whose voice had become more essential to him than sight itself. Sebastian, Alexander said as they reached the car. I need you to find out everything about Aria Volkov's past. But I also need you to investigate everyone who knew about my scheduled changes the day of the explosion. Someone's been playing a long game, and we're going to find out who. And if the rabbit hole goes deeper than we expect. Alexander smiled grimly, feeling more like himself than he had since waking up in darkness. Then we're going to burn it all down and build something better in the ashes. As they drove away from the detention center, Alexander pressed his hand against the car window, imagining he could feel the heat of the sun on his palm. Somewhere in the distance, Aria was sitting in a cell, paying a price for showing kindness to a broken man. But if his enemies thought blindness had made him helpless, they were about to learn how dangerous a cornered billionaire could be, even in the dark. The truth arrived in pieces over the next 3 days, each revelation more devastating than the last. Nathaniel Cross worked with the methodical precision of a master surgeon, peeling back layers of deception that had been decades in the making. What he uncovered in Alexander's penthouse office, surrounded by security monitors and encrypted files, redefined everything Alexander thought he knew about his life. Your grandfather didn't die of natural causes, Nathaniel said without preamble, his gravelly voice cutting through Alexander's comfortable illusions. Victor Thorne was murdered in 1999, 3 months before he planned to change his will. Alexander felt the words like physical blows. That's impossible. I was with him when he had the heart attack. Digitalis poisoning mimics cardiac arrest perfectly. Small doses over weeks, administered by someone with medical knowledge and intimate access. Nathaniel's fingers clicked across a keyboard. The coroner was paid to falsify the autopsy. I have bank records. The room seemed to spin even in darkness. His grandfather, the man who had raised him after his parents' death, who had taught him everything about business and integrity, murdered. By who? That's where it gets complicated. Papers rustled as Nathaniel organized his findings. Your grandfather suspected something before he died. He hired a private investigator to look into your parents' car accident. Alexander's chest tightened. What did they find? The brake lines were severed. Professional job, designed to look like mechanical failure. Your parents were murdered too, Alexander. And the same person responsible for their deaths killed your grandfather when he got too close to the truth. 24 years of believing his family had been taken by tragic accidents collapsed into a new, horrifying reality. Someone had systematically eliminated his family, leaving him alone and manipulable. Who? The word came out as a growl. Someone who needed you isolated, dependent, and controllable. Someone who could guide your business decisions from the shadows while appearing to be your ally. Even before Nathaniel spoke the name, Alexander knew. Dr. Elena Morrison, your attending physician. Your grandfather's doctor. Your parents' family physician going back 15 years. The woman who had delivered his devastating diagnosis about his blindness, who had access to his medical records, his room, his conversations with Aria, who could move through the hospital unquestioned and undocumented. She's been playing a 30-year game, Nathaniel continued, eliminating your family members one by one, positioning herself as your trusted medical advisor. gathering intelligence about your business decisions through your medical consultations. Alexander's mind reeled through decades of memories, recontextualizing them through this new lens of betrayal. Dr. Morrison had been there for every major medical event in his family's history. She'd held his hand at his grandfather's funeral. She'd recommended the specialists for his rare migraines that had started in college. Migraines that had required monthly consultations where he'd unconsciously shared information about business deals and personal relationships. But why? Alexander asked, though he was beginning to suspect the answer. Elena Morrison was born Elena Kozlov, sister to Dmitry Kozlov, the tech entrepreneur you destroyed in 2003 when you bought his company and dismantled it for patents. The Kozlov acquisition, one of Alexander's first major business victories, and one of his most ruthless. He'd identified weaknesses in Dmitry's operation, exploited them, and acquired the company for a fraction of its worth. Dmitry had lost everything: his fortune, his reputation, his ability to work in tech. Dmitry killed himself 6 months after the acquisition, Nathaniel said quietly. Elena blamed you for her brother's death. She spent the last 20 years positioning herself to destroy everything you loved, the way you destroyed everything her brother loved. The scope of Elena's revenge was staggering. She hadn't just wanted him dead. She'd wanted him to suffer first, to lose his family, his company, his sight, and finally, any hope of human connection. The explosion wasn't meant to kill me, Alexander realized with growing horror. It was meant to blind me. Elena knew exactly where to place the bomb to cause maximum ocular damage without being fatal. She needed you alive to suffer completely. Dead martyrs don't experience the full weight of loss. Alexander's hands clenched into fists. And Aria? Aria was selected specifically because Elena knew you'd be drawn to her. A beautiful voice, a caring nature, and a past that would make her vulnerable to coercion. Elena researched your psychological profile extensively. She knew you'd respond to someone who seemed authentic and uninterested in your wealth. The manipulation was so complete, so perfectly crafted, that Alexander felt nauseous. Even his growing feelings for Aria had been weaponized against him. But here's what Elena didn't count on, Nathaniel continued, a note of satisfaction entering his voice. Aria never delivered the information she was supposed to provide. The encrypted communications the FBI intercepted weren't about you at all. They were Aria negotiating with German medical facilities for her sister's treatment. Then how did Elena know about my emotional state? Hospital surveillance. Elena had access to security feeds and could observe your interactions firsthand. She didn't need Aria to tell her anything. She could see for herself that you were falling for the nurse. The revelation that Aria had protected him even while being blackmailed sent a surge of something between relief and rage through Alexander's chest. She had chosen to risk her sister's life rather than betray his trust. Where's Elena now? That's the problem. She disappeared 12 hours ago, left the hospital during a shift change, and hasn't been seen since. But Alexander, there's something else. The tone in Nathaniel's voice made Alexander's blood run cold. Elena has access to the Federal Detention Center's medical facilities. She volunteered to provide healthcare consultations for inmates with complex medical needs. She has access to Aria. Had access. Aria was transferred to the medical wing 6 hours ago for what Elena described as complications from a pre-existing condition. Alexander was on his feet before conscious thought kicked in. We need to get there now. Alexander, if this is a trap, then it's a trap I'm walking into with my eyes wide open. The bitter irony of the phrase wasn't lost on him. But I won't let Elena hurt Aria because of me. Not when Aria protected me, even when it cost her everything. As Sebastian guided him toward the door, Alexander realized that Elena's plan had one fatal flaw. She had assumed that destroying his sight would leave him helpless, that removing Aria would break his spirit completely. But she'd forgotten that the man who built a tech empire from nothing had never needed sight to be dangerous. He'd needed intelligence, determination, and the ability to recognize the value of the right people. And the most valuable person in his life was currently at the mercy of a woman who had spent 20 years perfecting the art of murder. The Federal Detention Center's medical wing existed in a twilight zone between prison and hospital, where the most vulnerable inmates received care from providers who asked no questions and kept no unnecessary records. It was the perfect place for someone like Elena to complete her revenge without witnesses. Alexander sat in Sebastian's surveillance van outside the facility, listening to the real-time updates from the infiltration team Nathaniel had assembled. The same skills that had built his tech empire: strategic thinking, resource deployment, and the ability to coordinate complex operations, were now focused on a rescue mission that could land him in federal prison. Aria's being held in the isolation ward came the voice through Sebastian's earpiece. Medical records show she was brought in for severe allergic reaction, but the symptoms don't match any known allergens. Poisoning, Alexander said grimly. Elena's specialty. But even as his team gathered intelligence, Alexander wrestled with a more fundamental question. What was he actually saving Aria for? His world had been destroyed. His company was gone. His sight was never returning. And he was about to become a federal fugitive. What kind of life could he offer someone like her? The answer came from an unexpected source. "Sir," Sebastian said quietly, "I've been monitoring communications from Thorne Industries. James isn't just stealing your company. He's dismantling everything you built. The charitable foundation, the scholarship programs, the medical research grants. He's liquidating assets and redirecting funds to offshore accounts." Alexander felt something inside him break. The Thorne Foundation had been his grandfather's legacy, a commitment to using wealth to solve problems rather than simply accumulate more wealth. Under Alexander's leadership, it had funded breakthrough medical research, provided education to thousands of disadvantaged children, and supported disaster relief efforts worldwide. "He's erasing your grandfather's legacy along with yours," Sebastian continued. 30 years of charitable work, gone. The weight of multiple betrayals pressed down on Alexander like a physical force. James hadn't just stolen a company. He'd obliterated the meaning behind everything Alexander had tried to build. "There's more," Sebastian added reluctantly. "The board voted tonight to rename the company. Thorne Industries will become Blackwood Technologies within the month." James was erasing Alexander from history itself, ensuring that future generations would never know what the Thorne name had stood for. But then Alexander heard something that changed everything. Through the surveillance equipment, Aria's voice came crackling over the radio. "I know who you are, Elena. I know what you did to his family." In the medical wing, Elena's carefully modulated physician voice had dropped its professional mask. Clever girl. Most people never see past the white coat and the medical degree. "You've been torturing him for decades," Aria continued, her voice growing stronger despite whatever Elena had given her. "Making him watch everyone he loved die, making him think he was cursed or unlucky. But you're just a broken woman who never learned to grieve properly." Alexander's hands clenched as he listened to the woman he was falling in love with face down his family's killer with nothing but moral courage. "Your brother chose to kill himself," Aria pressed on. Alexander didn't put the gun to his head. "Your brother made a business decision that failed, and instead of adapting, he gave up. But you couldn't accept that. So you spent 20 years destroying an innocent man's life." "Innocent." Elena's voice turned venomous. "He's a predator who builds his empire on the bones of smaller companies. He destroyed my brother's life work, scattered his employees to the wind, and never looked back. Dmitri poured his soul into that company, and Alexander treated it like spare parts." "So you decided to play God?" Aria shot back, her voice stronger now despite the drugs in her system. "You appointed yourself judge, jury, and executioner. But revenge didn't bring your brother back, did it? It just turned you into the monster you thought Alexander was." Through the radio, Alexander heard Elena's composure finally crack. He needs to understand what it feels like to lose everything, to watch helplessly as his world burns. "He does understand," Aria said softly. "He's been living in that hell for weeks now. But unlike you, he's trying to build something instead of just destroying. Even blind, even broken, he came here to save me. When's the last time someone risked everything for you, Elena?" The silence that followed was deafening. Then Sebastian's voice cut through the radio chatter. "Team leader, we have a problem. Elena's not just poisoning Aria. She's rigged the medical wing with explosives. This isn't just murder, it's a suicide mission designed to take out half the detention center." Alexander felt the world tilt. Elena wasn't planning to escape. She was planning to complete her revenge by ensuring Alexander watched another building explode, knowing Aria was inside and that his attempt to save her had led directly to her death. "How long do we have?" Alexander asked. "Unknown. The devices are on medical equipment throughout the wing. Could be triggered remotely or on a timer." Alexander made a decision that surprised even himself. "I'm going in." "Sir, that's suicide. You can't see, you don't know the layout. But I know Elena. She wants me to suffer, which means she wants me alive to witness Aria's death. She won't trigger the explosion until I'm there to see, to hear it happen." Sebastian's voice carried naked fear. "Alexander, this isn't a business negotiation. If you're wrong about her motivations, then I die trying to save someone who matters more to me than my own life." The admission surprised Alexander with its simple truth. "But I won't let Elena win. Not when Aria sacrificed her sister's treatment to protect me." 20 minutes later, Alexander stood at the medical wing entrance, guided by an earpiece connection to his infiltration team. The familiar hospital smells brought back memories of his recovery, of Aria's voice cutting through his despair with warmth and hope. "Elena," he called out as he moved slowly down the corridor, his hand trailing along the wall for guidance. "I know you're here. I know what you want." Her voice came from speakers throughout the wing. She'd taken control of the facility's communication system. "Alexander Thorne, finally willing to face the consequences of your actions." "I'm here to face you," Alexander replied, continuing his careful progress toward what he hoped was the medical isolation unit. "But first, let Aria go. Your quarrel is with me. Let her go." Elena's laugh was bitter and unhinged. "She's the perfect final punishment. You'll get to hear her die knowing that your feelings for her sealed her fate." "You're wrong about something, Elena." Alexander stopped walking, letting his voice carry down the corridor. "Aria isn't my weakness, she's my strength. For the first time in my life, I care more about someone else's well-being than my own success. That's not a vulnerability you can exploit. It's power you can't understand." Touching, but irrelevant. Is it? Because here's what I learned about you while you were planning this final scene. You've been alone for 20 years, Elena. No relationships, no friends, no one who would miss you if you disappeared tomorrow. You think love is weakness because you've never experienced it as strength. The speakers went quiet for a long moment. "You destroyed my brother," Elena said finally, her voice raw now. "Yes, I did. I was 23, hungry, and ruthless. I saw his company as a stepping stone, and I took it without thinking about the human cost." Alexander paused, letting the admission settle. "But spending 20 years destroying innocent people won't resurrect Dmitri. It just makes you the thing you hated about me." "Too late for apologies, Alexander." "I'm not apologizing. I'm offering you something better than revenge." Alexander had reached a door marked medical isolation, authorized personnel only. Through the reinforced glass, he could hear Aria's labored breathing. "Elena, what if I told you I could give you your brother back?" The question hung in the air like a live wire. "Dmitri didn't just build a tech company," Alexander continued. "He built revolutionary adaptive interface technology for disabled users. I buried that research when I acquired his company because I didn't understand its value. But I kept everything, every prototype, every line of code, every design document." "You're lying. I'm offering you a choice. You can kill me and Aria in this medical wing, completing your revenge, but ensuring Dimitri's work dies with us. Or you can help me honor your brother's memory by completing his mission." Alexander pressed his hand against the isolation room door, feeling the vibration of medical equipment on the other side. Dmitri was trying to build technology that would help people like me, people who'd lost their sight, interface with the world through sound and touch. Imagine what that technology could do now, 20 years later, with quantum processing and AI integration. My brother's work was theoretical, incomplete. Your brother was a genius ahead of his time, but you're a doctor with access to cutting-edge medical research, and I'm a tech mogul with unlimited resources and a personal understanding of what his technology could achieve. Alexander's voice took on the intensity that had convinced investors to bet billions on his vision. Together, we could build something that would save millions of people who suffer from visual impairment. We could make Dimitri's name synonymous with hope instead of tragedy. Why would you want to honor the man whose company you destroyed? Because I'm not the same person I was at 23. And because the woman in that room taught me that redemption is possible, even for someone like me. The silence stretched so long that Alexander began to wonder if Elena had already triggered the explosives. Then her voice came back, smaller now, more human. Even if I wanted to believe you, it's too late. The FBI will arrest me the moment I surrender. I'll spend the rest of my life in prison. Not necessarily. Alexander played his final card. I have resources you can't imagine and connections that span the globe. Help me save Aria, and I'll help you disappear. New identity, new life, enough money to fund your brother's research independently. But only if you choose creation over destruction. And if I refuse, Alexander's voice hardened. Then you'll die knowing you wasted 20 years of your life on revenge that accomplished nothing except proving you're exactly the kind of person who destroys rather than builds. The choice is yours, Elena. But choose quickly, because whether you help me or not, I'm getting Aria out of that room. The medical wing fell silent except for the hum of machines and Alexander's own thundering heartbeat. Somewhere in the darkness ahead, the woman who had become his light was fighting for her life, while the woman who had destroyed his family held both their fates in her hands. Alexander stepped forward into the unknown, guided only by love and the desperate hope that 20 years of hate could be overcome by the possibility of 20 years of healing. The isolation room door opened with a soft electronic beep, and Alexander stepped inside to find himself in the center of Elena's final trap. "She's dying," Elena said from somewhere to his left, her voice stripped of all pretense. "I gave her a compound that will shut down her respiratory system in approximately 15 minutes. There's an antidote, but it's across the city in my private lab." Alexander knelt beside the hospital bed, finding Aria's hand with his. Her skin was cold, her pulse rapid and weak. "Alexander." Aria's voice was barely a whisper. "You shouldn't have come. I couldn't leave you." He squeezed her hand gently. "I'm getting you out of here." Touching. Elena interrupted. "But impossible. The detention center is locked down. No one goes in or out until morning. Even if you could reach my lab, you'd never find the antidote without sight. It's unmarked, stored with dozens of other compounds." Alexander felt the cruel symmetry of Elena's final revenge. She was forcing him to choose between staying with Aria as she died or abandoning her in a futile attempt at rescue that would certainly fail. "Unless," Elena continued, "you're willing to make a trade." "What kind of trade?" "Your life for hers. I inject you with the same compound, and I give her the antidote. You experience the same slow suffocation your parents felt when their car went off that bridge, and she walks free." Alexander didn't hesitate. "Done." "No." Aria's grip on his hand tightened with surprising strength. "Alexander, no. Don't you dare. It's the only way." "It's not," Aria interrupted, and something in her voice made him pause. "Elena, you said the antidote is in your lab. But you're lying about one thing. You wouldn't come here without a backup plan. You have some of the antidote with you." Elena's silence confirmed the accuracy of Aria's deduction. "You're not just a nurse," Alexander realized, pieces clicking into place. "Who are you really?" Aria's laugh was weak but genuine. "Dr. Aria Volkov. I finished my medical degree in Romania before nursing school. I specialized in toxicology." The revelation hit Alexander like lightning. "You've known what Elena gave you from the beginning. A carnitine derivative, probably modified to slow the absorption rate for maximum psychological impact." Elena's signature, based on the research papers she published before she went into private practice. Elena's voice cut through their conversation like a blade. Clever. But knowledge doesn't change biochemistry. You're still dying. True, Aria agreed. But I know something else about aconitine derivatives. They're neutralized by a specific enzyme that's produced naturally in response to extreme physical stress. The kind of stress that comes from intense cardiovascular activity. You're suggesting what exactly? Elena's voice carried a note of uncertainty now. I'm suggesting that the antidote isn't the only solution. Alexander, I need you to trust me. Alexander felt Aria trying to sit up despite her weakening condition. What do you need me to do? I need you to help me get my heart rate above 160 beats per minute and maintain it there for at least 10 minutes. It's the only way my body will produce enough of the enzyme to counteract the poison. That's medically impossible in your condition, Elena protested. The cardiovascular stress would kill you faster than the aconitine. Maybe, Aria admitted. But it's better than dying helplessly in a hospital bed. Alexander understood immediately. You need me to give you something worth fighting for. I need you to give me hope. What followed was the most intense conversation of Alexander's life. As he held Aria's hand in the darkness, he told her everything. His plans for honoring Dimitri's memory. His vision for technology that could help the visually impaired interface with the world. His growing certainty that she had become essential to any future worth having. I know we've only known each other for 2 weeks, Alexander said, feeling her pulse quicken under his fingertips. But in those 2 weeks, you've shown me what I've been missing my entire life. Not just sight, purpose beyond profit, care without calculation, love without agenda. Alexander, Aria whispered, but her voice was growing stronger. I'm not asking you to save me from the darkness, he continued. I'm asking you to help me build something beautiful in it. Help me turn Dimitri's vision into reality. Help me prove that redemption is possible, even for someone who's made the mistakes I've made. Aria's pulse was racing now, driven by more than just biochemistry. Alexander could hear the change in her breathing, feel the warmth returning to her skin. You're asking me to rebuild my life around a blind billionaire who's about to lose everything he owns, she said. But there was laughter in her voice now. I'm asking you to build a new life with a man who just figured out that everything he owned was worthless compared to everything he could become. Behind them, Elena watched the impossible unfold. Her perfect revenge was crumbling as love proved stronger than poison, as two people found light in each other despite the darkness surrounding them. This isn't how it's supposed to end, Elena said, her voice breaking. No, Alexander agreed, never taking his attention from Aria. It's supposed to end with understanding that your brother would be ashamed of what you've become. Dimitri built technology to help people. You've spent 20 years hurting them. Aria's breathing had stabilized, her pulse strong and steady. The enzyme production theory had worked. Or perhaps it was simply the power of having something worth living for. Elena, Aria said, turning toward where the doctor stood. It's not too late. Help us honor your brother's memory. Help us build something that matters. For a moment, the medical wing was silent except for the soft beeping of monitoring equipment. Then Elena made her choice. The explosives are on a dead man switch, she said quietly. If my heart stops, the medical wing goes up in flames. That was always the plan, to ensure my death completed the destruction even if I couldn't trigger it manually. Alexander felt his blood turn to ice. Elena, what are you saying? I'm saying that 20 years of hate has turned me into exactly the kind of person Dimitri would have despised. And the only way to stop this is for me to find another way to die. There has to be another solution. There is. Elena's voice carried a note of peace he hadn't heard before. I can remove the dead man switch, but doing so will trigger a massive cardiac event. The fail-safes I built into my own system to prevent capture. Alexander realized with horror that Elena had turned herself into a human bomb, rigged to explode rather than face justice for her crimes. You have 3 minutes to get Aria out of the medical wing before I disable the switch, Elena continued. After that, this section of the building will be uninhabitable, but the rest of the facility will be safe. Elena, there has to be another way. There is no other way. Elena's voice cracked with 20 years of suppressed grief. I've become something my brother would hate. The only redemption left is to ensure his work survives even if I don't. As alarms began blaring throughout the facility, Alexander helped Aria to her feet, supporting her as they moved toward the exit. Behind them, Elena began systematically destroying the surveillance equipment that had recorded their conversation. Alexander, Elena called out as they reached the door. In my lab, there's a safe behind the medical texts. The combination is Dimitri's birthday, 0847. Everything he ever created is in there. Every prototype, every dream he never got to realize. Promise me you'll make them real. Elena, promise me. I promise. As they stumbled through the corridors towards safety, guided by Sebastian's voice through the earpiece, Alexander felt the weight of what had just happened. Elena's death would close the circle of revenge that had consumed both their families, but it would also give him the chance to transform that cycle of destruction into something creative and healing. But first, he had to get Aria to safety, and then he had to figure out how to rebuild a life from the ashes of everything he thought he understood about love, loss, and the possibility of redemption. The explosion lit up the night sky behind them as Sebastian's team evacuated Alexander and Aria from the detention center. But instead of the massive detonation Elena had threatened, it was contained, controlled. The desperate act of a woman who had finally chosen creation over destruction even in her final moments. 3 days later, in Elena's private laboratory, hidden beneath a brownstone across the city, Alexander discovered the true scope of what Elena had been hiding. This isn't just medical research, Aria breathed as she described the lab's contents to Alexander. Her voice had fully recovered, though she still moved carefully after her ordeal. This is Dimitri's entire life work, preserved and expanded over 20 years. What exactly are we looking at? Alexander asked, running his hands over unfamiliar equipment while Aria guided him through the space. Adaptive neural interfaces, haptic feedback systems, and something called Project Echo. Aria paused, papers rustling as she read. Alexander, your grandfather funded Dimitri's research. These are quarterly reports to Thorne Foundation dating back to 1998. The revelation hit Alexander like a physical blow. That's impossible. I would have known. Not if your grandfather kept it secret. Look at this letter. Aria's voice grew excited as she read. It's from Victor Thorne to Dimitri, dated 3 months before your grandfather's death. The neural interface technology you've developed will revolutionize how people with visual impairments experience the world. However, I'm concerned about the corporate espionage attempts you've reported. Perhaps it's best to keep this research private until Alexander is mature enough to understand its value. Alexander sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the implications. His grandfather had been protecting Dimitri's work, recognizing its importance while Alexander had been too young and ambitious to see beyond immediate profit margins. There's more, Aria continued. Elena didn't just preserve Dimitri's research. She completed it. Everything he dreamed of building, she actually built. Alexander, this technology could give you back more than sight. It could give you an entirely new way of seeing. As Aria described the devices scattered throughout the lab, Alexander began to understand the magnitude of what Elena had accomplished in her grief. Dimitri's vision of adaptive technology had evolved into something approaching science fiction. Neural interfaces that could translate visual information into complex auditory and tactile patterns, allowing blind users to see through sound and touch. She spent 20 years perfecting technology that could have helped you, Aria said softly, while planning to destroy you. The irony was devastating and beautiful. Elena's love for her brother had driven her to complete his mission even as her hatred for Alexander had consumed her life. Can it work? Alexander asked. According to these notes, she tested it successfully on herself. Elena was losing her sight to macular degeneration, has been for years. She used herself as a guinea pig to perfect the technology. Elena was going blind, That's how she knew exactly where to place the explosion to cause optical damage without death. She understood the medical implications personally. Aria's voice grew thoughtful. Alexander, I think Elena's final revenge was more complex than we realized. She didn't just want you to suffer. She wanted you to have the chance to transform the way she never could. As they spent hours exploring Elena's hidden legacy, Alexander began to see the outline of a future he'd never imagined. The technology could help millions of people worldwide, but more than that, it could serve as the foundation for a completely different kind of company, one focused on human enhancement rather than corporate domination. I want to offer you something, Alexander said as they prepared to leave the lab. A partnership, not just romantic, but professional. Help me build Dimitri's dream into reality. Alexander, I'm a nurse and a toxicologist, not a tech entrepreneur. You're a problem solver who saved both our lives with biochemistry and quick thinking. You understand human physiology in ways that could make this technology actually work for real people instead of just impressing investors. Aria was quiet for a long moment. What about your company? James still controls Thorne Industries. Alexander smiled, feeling more like himself than he had since before the explosion. James can have Thorne Industries. I'm going to build something better, something that would make my grandfather and Dimitri proud. And the FBI investigation? Nathaniel found evidence of Elena's crimes going back decades. The authorities will be more interested in closing cold cases than pursuing conspiracy charges against victims of her manipulation. Alexander reached out, finding Aria's hand in the darkness. We're free to build whatever we want. What we want, Aria repeated thoughtfully. I like the sound of that. As they left Elena's lab carrying boxes of research that would change everything, Alexander realized that the explosion 2 weeks ago had done more than take a sight. It had shattered the walls he'd built around his heart, allowing him to see clearly for the first time in his adult life. Not with his eyes, but with something deeper and more reliable than vision had ever been. But their victory celebration was interrupted by Sebastian's urgent voice through the car radio. Alexander, we have a problem. James just announced that Thorne Industries is merging with a Chinese tech conglomerate. He's selling your life's work to the highest bidder. Let him, Alexander replied, surprising everyone in the car. I never want to see the Thorne name attached to that company again. We're building something completely different. What do you want to call it? Aria asked. Alexander considered for a moment, thinking about second chances, about technology serving humanity, about the possibility of turning the worst experiences of life into the foundation for something beautiful. Echo, he said finally. We're calling it Echo Technologies, because sometimes the most important sounds are the ones that come back to us when we're ready to hear them. 6 months later, Alexander stood on the stage of the Global Innovation Summit, addressing an audience of 3,000 technology leaders, investors, and journalists. The neural interface device Elena had perfected allowed him to see the crowd through sophisticated audio mapping, each person's location and movement translated into spatial sound that painted a vivid picture in his mind. But it wasn't a technology that held the audience spellbound. It was a story he told about redemption, about finding light in darkness, about learning that the most important things in life couldn't be seen with eyes anyway. Echo Technologies isn't just about building adaptive interfaces for the visually impaired, Alexander said, his voice carrying to every corner of the auditorium. It's about recognizing that human limitation often breeds the innovation that benefits everyone. The technology we developed doesn't just help blind people navigate the world. It's revolutionizing how astronauts work in zero visibility, how surgeons operate in confined spaces, how emergency responders function in disaster zones. In the front row, Aria watched with pride as the man who had once defined himself through corporate conquest found his true calling in human service. The Echo prototype around his head was nearly invisible, an elegant circlet that translated visual information into rich auditory landscapes. But the real breakthrough, Alexander continued, isn't technological. It's understanding that collaboration creates more value than competition, that healing generates more wealth than harming, and that the most important partnerships are built on trust rather than profit margins. The audience erupted in applause, but Alexander's attention was focused on one sound, Aria's distinctive laugh, warm and genuine, cutting through the noise to reach him like a personal message. After the presentation, they walked together through the bustling conference center, Alexander's interface allowing him to navigate confidently, while Aria described the visual details that mattered. The expressions on people's faces, the way sunlight streamed through the glass ceiling, the colors of the flowers in the lobby displays. The Romanian medical facility called this morning, Aria said, as they found a quiet corner away from the crowds. Amira's cancer is in complete remission. The treatment worked. Alexander felt a surge of satisfaction that had nothing to do with business success. Saving Aria's sister had been their first collaborative project, proof that their partnership could create real-world impact beyond technology development. Speaking of family, Alexander said, reaching into his jacket pocket, I have something for you. Alexander, if this is what I think it is, it's not what you think it is. He pulled out a small device that looked like a sophisticated hearing aid. It's a prototype communication system. When you wear this, you can hear exactly what I hear through the Echo interface. We'll experience the world the same way. Aria took the device with hands that trembled slightly. You want to share your way of seeing with me? I want to share everything with you. The technology, the company, the future we're building together. Alexander's voice grew soft, intimate. But I also want you to understand that when I say I love you, it's not because you saved me from the darkness. It's because you taught me that the darkness was never the real problem. What was the real problem? I was so focused on seeing everything around me that I never learned to see inside myself, to recognize what actually mattered. Aria stepped closer, and Alexander caught the familiar scent of jasmine that had comforted him through his worst moments. And what actually matters? Building something together that's bigger than either of us could create alone. Technology that serves humanity instead of dominating it. Love that's based on who we're becoming instead of who we've been. As Aria fitted the communication device into her ear, Alexander heard her sharp intake of breath as the Echo interface activated, sharing his auditory vision with her for the first time. Alexander, she whispered, this is incredible. I can hear the shape of the room, the location of every person, the texture of sound reflecting off different surfaces. Now you know how I see you, Alexander said, taking her hand. Not as someone to be rescued or someone to worship, but as a partner capable of building miracles. The conference buzzed around them, full of investors eager to fund Echo Technologies and competitors trying to understand how a blind CEO had developed technology that surpassed anything in the market. But Alexander's attention was focused entirely on the woman beside him, sharing his unique perspective on a world that looked nothing like he'd expected, but sounded more beautiful than anything he'd ever seen. 6 months ago, he'd been a ruthless tech mogul who measured success in market capitalization and corporate acquisitions. Today, he was something entirely different, a man who had learned that the most valuable things in life couldn't be quantified or controlled, only experienced and shared. There's something I need to tell you, Aria said as they prepared to leave the conference center. Elena's research included files on other people she'd been watching, potential targets for future revenge. Alexander felt his blood chill. How many others? Dozens. Elena spent 20 years building detailed profiles on everyone she blamed for her brother's death. Investors, competitors, journalists who covered the acquisition negatively. She was planning a campaign of destruction that would have lasted decades. The weight of responsibility settled on Alexander's shoulders. Elena's death had stopped her personal vendetta against him, but her files revealed a network of intended victims who had no idea they'd been marked for revenge. We have to warn them, Alexander said. We have to do more than that, Aria replied. We have to help them. Elena's files contain sensitive information about their personal lives, their vulnerabilities, their secrets. If that information falls into the wrong hands. Alexander nodded, understanding immediately. Echo Technologies would need to expand beyond adaptive interfaces to include personal security, threat assessment, and protection services for people targeted by vengeful enemies. So we're not just building technology to help the blind, Alexander mused. We're building a comprehensive system to protect people from predators who use their vulnerabilities against them. Exactly. And Alexander. Aria's voice carried a smile he could hear clearly. I think Dmitri and your grandfather would approve. As they walked out into the evening air, Alexander realized that Elena's greatest failure had been underestimating the power of genuine partnership. She had spent 20 years alone with her hatred, while he and Aria were building something together that was stronger than any individual ambition. The future stretched ahead of them, full of challenges and possibilities that neither of them could have imagined alone. But together, they had already proven that love could overcome poison, that trust could survive betrayal, and that the most beautiful things in life were often invisible to the naked eye. What did this story teach you about finding light in darkness? Alexander whispered to Aria as they stood together under stars he couldn't see, but could feel in the warmth of her presence beside him. It taught me that some of the most important things we'll ever see can only be perceived with our hearts, she replied, and that the most beautiful love stories begin not with sight, but with recognition. As they disappeared into the night, two people who had found each other in the deepest darkness, Alexander's voice carried back on the evening breeze like a promise to anyone who might be listening. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover what was always meant to be yours. In the distance, the lights of the city glittered like stars, visible to some and invisible to others, but equally beautiful to anyone who had learned that the most important illumination comes from within and is shared between hearts that recognize their match across any distance, through any darkness, beyond any limitation. What did this story teach you about finding hope in seemingly hopeless situations? Drop your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories that will change how you see the world.